Rejected for her curves. That night, Lonely Rancher changed her fate in Wild West Stories. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. They called it Silver Creek, a place where pride cut deeper than bullets and the cold could kill a soul quicker than a gun. She came rejected, he lived broken, and the town watched. But under that wide sky, two outcasts stood together, and by sundown, nothing in this valley would ever be the same. She stepped off the stagecoach, only to be cast aside before the whole town could blink. The stagecoach rattled down the frozen road, its wheels grinding against ruts, hardened by weeks of frost. Silver Creek lay ahead, a small town tucked at the edge of the Colorado hills, where smoke from chimneys clung low in the winter air. The horses steamed, their flanks damp with sweat, despite the bitter wind that cut through coats and scarves alike. Folks in town barely looked up when the coach finally clattered into the square. Mary Lou Carter stepped down, her breath rising in white clouds. Her traveling dress, once neat back in St. Louis, bore the scars of the long journey. Seams tugged too tight, a sleeve frayed from catching on the coach door, and the hem muddied by snow and dust. She adjusted her shawl against the cold, her cheeks raw and red, but her eyes, sharp, restless, swept the square with a strength that belied her weariness. She carried one carpet bag, hugged close to her side, the last remnant of a home she no longer had. In her pocket rested the folded letters that had promised her a fresh beginning in Silver Creek. She had traveled half a country believing in those words, in the hope of belonging somewhere at last. Franklin Dorsey was waiting on the boardwalk in front of the bank. Clean-shaven, his boots polished, his coat tailored finer than most men could afford. He looked every bit the banker's son, his gaze fixed on her, not with warmth, but with an assessing eye. When he spoke, his words came clipped, cold. "Miss Carter," he said, drawing the attention of those nearby, "this won't do. You're not what I expected." The sentence fell sharper than the winter wind. His eyes lingered too long on her figure, on the weight she carried openly, the curves she could not hide beneath her dress. His lips tightened with disapproval, his shoulders stiff. Mary Lou's jaw set. "I crossed half a country on your word, Franklin. You asked me to come." Her voice was low, steady, though her heart hammered beneath the too tight bodice. But Franklin only shook his head, embarrassed by the eyes of the town upon him. "This is a mistake," he muttered, turning away, retreating into the polished shadow of the bank. The square was silent for a long moment. A widow sweeping her porch whispered behind her hand. A shopkeeper glanced, then looked away. Mary Lou stood alone in the middle of the street, her carpetbag clutched tight, her chin lifted as if she could hold her dignity through sheer will. Across the street, a man leaned against the post outside the saloon. His duster hung heavy with dust, his hat pulled low. Ethan McGraw watched, silent, his gray-blue eyes narrowing. A limp marked his step when he shifted, the old wound of a war no one asked about. He had no place in the quarrels of the town, no reason to intervene. But something in Mary Lou's defiance, her refusal to break, even as the cold cut deeper than any words, stirred a chord he thought long dead. She remained there, stranded, the sound of the departing coach fading into the wind. Franklin was gone, the townsfolk had already returned to their chores, and the square seemed colder than ever. Mary Lou pressed her lips together, squared her shoulders, and sat down on the edge of the platform, the bag still in her lap. She would not cry. She would not give them that. From his place by the saloon, Ethan tipped his hat low, but his eyes never left her. In a land where the wind carried more than snow, he knew trouble when he saw it. And he knew this woman had just stepped straight into it. A scarred rancher opened his door, not knowing a storm was walking in with her. Ethan McGraw left the saloon ahead of the gossip. He saddled his mare in the alley, swung up slow to spare the bad leg, and rode south where the cottonwoods lined the creek like old sentries. The afternoon light was thin as tin. Snow held to the shade, and the wind came off the ridges with a taste of iron. Ethan didn't look back toward the square. He'd seen enough. Silver Creek had a way of swallowing folks whole and calling it justice. His spread sat low in a shallow bowl of land. One weathered house of pine, a lean-to stable, a stack of cordwood, and fence posts that could use a new set of nails. Smoke curled from the stovepipe when he lit kindling with a twist of newspaper. The place echoed a little when he walked. One plate on a shelf, one tin cup, one chair worn to the shape of a solitary man. He hung his hat on the peg, listened to the pop of resin in the stove, and told himself to leave the town's business to the town. Not an hour later, hoofbeats came slow up the lane. Ethan glanced through the window and saw Sheriff Cole Avery, coat collar turned up, hat brim wet with melt. The old lawman dismounted with the creak of leather that had seen 3 wars and 2 floods. He didn't waste words. "McGraw," he said, standing in the doorway, "there's a lady needs a roof." Franklin's made a fool of himself again. Ethan's jaw worked once. "I saw." Cole set his gloves on the sill, palm scar showing pale as rope. "She's alone, and the weather's turning. I can't put her at Rachel's. Gossip'll eat her alive. And you—" He paused, measuring the room. "You don't leave folks to freeze." Ethan said nothing for a long breath. Then he nodded. "Bring her." The sheriff rode off and returned with Mary Lou Carter, perched stiff on a borrowed mare, carpetbag tied with a loop of twine. She slid down awkwardly, the cold biting through to bone, and stood uncertain in the yard while Ethan stepped out with a lantern. Up close, he saw the travel-worn seams, the red windburn on her cheeks, and the stubborn set of the chin that had kept her upright in the square. "I can pay my keep," she said, before he could speak. "I won't be charity." "Good," Ethan answered, voice even. "I don't offer charity." Cole tipped his hat. "I'll look in on Franklin. See that his temper don't write checks his skin can't cash." He rode off, leaving the 3 of them, man, woman, and the wind, standing across from one another like strangers at a crossroads. Inside, the house felt warmer than it looked. Ethan poured coffee from the blackened pot and set it on the table with a heel of bread and a jar of peach preserve left from the last good summer. Mary Lou accepted with a nod and both hands, as if heat itself were a blessing that needed steadying. She ate small, careful bites, the way someone does who's learned to make a little last. "I can sweep, mend, chop kindling," she offered. "I was raised to work." Ethan studied the fire. "Barn'll need feeding before dark. You up to it?" "Yes, sir." They went out together. The stable smelled of hay and leather, honest smells. Ethan forked alfalfa while she filled the tin pans with oats, moving slow at first, then steadier when the routine showed her its simple logic. The mare nosed her shoulder and snorted. Mary Lou laughed, quick, surprised, soft, as if a part of her had been waiting for something to push back without malice. Dusk fell like a blanket being pulled to the chin. The ridge turned blue and then black. In the house, Ethan set a pot of beans to simmer with a strip of salt pork. Mary Lou mended a torn sleeve from his work shirt by lamplight, her needle going in and out with a patient rhythm. Words were few. The tick of the lantern and the hiss of the stove filled the spaces where town people might have stuffed chatter. When they'd eaten, Ethan laid a clean wool blanket at the foot of the bed and dragged the chair closer to the stove. "You take the bed," he said. "I do fine in the chair." Mary Lou opened her mouth to protest, then saw the way the bad leg stretched long when he sat, pain hiding in plain sight. "All right," she said, voice quiet, "for tonight." Outside, a coyote called from the far pasture. Another answered thin and high. The wind slackened, leaving a silence that made the walls seem thinner. Mary Lou folded her dress over the chair back and lay on the bed in her stockings, eyes fixed on the rafters where old knots made constellations only this roof knew. She listened to Ethan bank the fire, to the chair creak when he settled, to the soft scrape as he set the rifle within easy reach. She thought of Franklin's polished boots and the way he'd looked at her as if she were a problem to be solved, not a soul to be met. She thought of the letters in her pocket, promises gone to paper dust. Then she thought of Ethan's steady hands, the warm coffee, the room that held no judgment, only the smell of pine and iron, and a man trying to keep his corner of the world standing. The coyotes quit. The night held its breath. From somewhere out by the cottonwoods came a low, dragging sound. one that didn't belong to wind or beast. Ethan straightened in the chair, head cocked, eyes on the door. He reached for the rifle without looking away. "Stay put," he said, voice low. Mary Lou sat up, heart thudding. The sound came again, closer now, like something heavy brushing the yard boards. Ethan rose, favoring the bad leg, and eased the latch. The lantern flame trembled, so did the air between them. In the glow of a stove, silence burned hotter than fire itself. The dragging sound outside faded into silence, and when Ethan opened the door, all he found was a loose shutter on the barn flapping in the wind. He secured it, rifle in hand, then came back inside with the kind of quiet shrug a man uses when he knows the prairie plays tricks on nerves. Mary Lou settled back, though sleep was fitful, her ears tuned to every creak and sigh of that lonesome house. By morning the storm had passed, leaving the valley glazed with frost. The air bit hard, clear enough to show each breath like smoke. Ethan was already at the stove, coffee simmering, when Mary Lou stirred from the bed. He said nothing, only slid a tin cup her way. She sipped, grateful for the bitter warmth, and felt the edge of fear soften. That day began her true labor. Ethan showed her the barn. Stalls thick with manure, hay stacked loose, a pump stiff with ice. She worked clumsy at first, her skirts catching on the rails, her fingers raw against the pitchfork handle, but she pushed on, refusing to complain. Ethan watched without comment, noting the steadiness in her shoulders. By noon, her palms blistered, but she smiled at the horse nosing her sleeve, and that smile stayed with him longer than he liked to admit. The hours found a rhythm: feed, haul, mend. When dusk came, they returned to the cabin with muscles sore, but spirits oddly lighter. Ethan lit the stove, dropped beans and potatoes into a pot, while Mary Lou cut onions, her hands red from the cold water bucket. Their shoulders brushed once, then again, and neither moved away. In the hush of work, a strange comfort grew. That evening, Rachel O'Hara arrived. She swept in from the yard in her red shawl, cheeks flushed from the ride, eyes sharp as ever. She looked at Mary Lou, then at Ethan, and shook her head with a half smile. "Franklin's been running his mouth," she said, "telling folks you tricked him, Mary Lou. Says you came west to trap him." Mary Lou stiffened. Shame rose hot, but she held her chin high. "He courted me with letters, promises. I came because he asked." Rachel laid a hand on her arm. "I know, child. But men like Franklin think their words vanish once spoken. The town will take his side quick, unless you stand your ground." Ethan leaned against the stove, silent, eyes shadowed beneath his hat brim. Rachel glanced at him. "And you, McGraw? Folks will say plenty if you keep her here. Decide if you care." When she left, the cabin felt smaller. Mary Lou folded her carpet bag, slid it under the bed, then sat with her hands clasped. Ethan spoke at last. "You planning to run from every whisper?" "No," she answered, voice steady. "I'm tired of running. I'll earn my keep and I'll hold my head high. Let them talk." Ethan studied her a long moment, then nodded once, as if some private decision had been made. Later, by the fire, she mended a sleeve of his shirt. He sat close, carving a new handle for a worn bridle, his knife rasping wood in patient strokes. The quiet was thick, but not empty. When she pricked her finger on the needle, he passed her a rag without a word. Their eyes met, brief, but heavy with something neither named. The night deepened. Outside, coyotes sang against the ridge, their cries weaving through the stillness. Inside, Mary Lou brushed out her hair, the lamplight catching copper strands. Ethan set aside his knife, watching without meaning to. The stove glowed, painting the room with a soft, wavering light. She felt his gaze, not the sharp judgment of Franklin, but something warmer, heavier. For a moment she let her shawl slip from her shoulders, then caught herself and drew it back tight. The air between them hummed, fragile as a thread. Ethan cleared his throat, rose with a limp, and banked the fire. "Long day tomorrow," he muttered. She nodded, lying back on the bed, with her heart still racing. Sleep came slow. In the dark, Mary Lou thought of Franklin's scorn, of Rachel's warning, of Ethan's steady presence beside the stove. Her body ached, her hands stung, yet for the first time since leaving St. Louis, she felt she might belong to the land, rather than be swallowed by it. The coyotes quit, and the night held still. Mary Lou listened to Ethan's chair creak, the sound of a man keeping watch, even in rest. She drifted at last into dreams, not of rejection, but of firelight and a home that might, just might, be hers. A note thrown in the night promised she'd pay if she stayed. By the end of the week, Silver Creek was buzzing like a kicked anthill. Word rolled along the boardwalks that Mary Lou had snared the loner out by the cottonwoods, that she'd ridden in on a web of letters and set her sights on a deed. Franklin Dorsey poured kerosene on every rumor, standing glossy in his father's doorway, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd been fooled by a schemer from back east. Folks nodded the way folks do when a banker's boy talks like gospel. Rachel O'Hara heard it all over the clink of glass. Men who talk that much got something to hide, she told Sheriff Cole, wiping the bar. Cole grunted, thumb worrying the scar in his palm. Talking ain't a crime, he said, but it's often a trail to one. Out at Ethan's place, life narrowed to the honest business of keeping things alive. The pump thawed, then froze again. A heifer calved early. Mary Lou held the lantern while Ethan worked with calm hands, steam rising from the newborn like prayer in cold air. They said little, but the kind of silence between them held more truth than most conversations in town. Sam Tucker showed up 2 mornings running, hat in hand, asking if Ethan needed day work. Sam had ridden for Ethan before, good with horses, bad with money. Gambling had carved him thin. Just until the thaw, Sam said, not quite meeting Mary Lou's eyes. Ethan studied the man and saw the frayed edges. "Feed the string and check the south fence," he said finally. "Pays by the day." Sam worked hard, but he watched harder. Mary Lou felt his gaze on her back like a splinter. When she carried a bucket past the corral, he said too easy, "Town's saying you got plans bigger than wash and mend." She set the bucket down and met him straight. "Town says a lot. I have work." Sam shrugged, mouth quirking like a pocket knife. "Sure do." That night, Rachel rode out with a sack of coffee and a loaf of soda bread. She stepped into the lamplight, took in the 2 cups on the table, the mended shirt on the peg, the way Ethan moved his chair closer to the stove without thinking. "Let me guess," she said dry. "You both plan to ignore the town until the town goes away." Ethan's mouth flickered. "That the wrong plan?" Rachel set the bread down. "Wrong? No. Thin as spring ice." She told them straight what Franklin had been doing, softening lenders, whispering about liens, hinting that certain parcels might change hands come summer. "Your land sits like a keystone," she said to Ethan, "block you, and he strings the valley like beads." Mary Lou felt the floor tilt a little. Ethan only said, "He'll need more than talk to take what ain't his." The next day, Sam didn't show. Toward noon, Mary Lou rode the fence alone while Ethan fixed a broken sled runner in the yard. She followed the wire west until the cottonwoods rose black against a pewter sky. Crows hopped in the stubble, black ink on gray paper. She found a cut in the wire, neat as a seam, and a hoof line leading off toward the old quarry. Someone had led cattle through and back, testing, not stealing. She patched the gap with cold-stung fingers and rode home with the muscle between her shoulders tight as a drumhead. Ethan listened, jaw ticking once. "Testing the fence is counting your teeth," he said. "Means they're measuring what it costs to bite." He oiled the Winchester slow, as if the metal itself needed reassuring. That evening, Sheriff Cole swung by, bringing a wedge of news under his coat. "Franklin's been at the recorder's office, he said, warming his hands, asking after titles and maps. He's hungry." Ethan nodded toward Mary Lou. "He's also loud." Cole looked at her a long beat, eyes kind but unblinking. Loud men scare easy when they meet someone who won't. Then he tipped his hat and left tracks across the hard yard that the wind started to erase at once. Twilight burned down to embers. Mary Lou stirred stew. Ethan cut biscuits with a tin cup and baked them in the Dutch oven. Their hands brushed when he passed the salt. She held the touch a heartbeat longer than necessity and let it go, leaving a small warmth that carried through the meal. After dishes, Ethan stepped onto the porch to breathe the cold. The stars were close enough to touch, the kind of night a man could hear his own blood. Mary Lou folded the kitchen towel and turned to bank the fire when the window glass clicked. A small sound, crisp as a snapped twig. She froze, listening. Another click, then the soft skitter of something sliding across the floorboards. Ethan was through the door in 3 long steps, rifle in hand. He nudged the scrap with his boot, a folded sheet torn from ledger paper, tied with a loop of twine and a pebble. He looked at Mary Lou, then knelt and opened it under the lamplight. The writing was big and blunt, the kind of hand that never met a schoolmarm long, but meant every stroke. She ain't yours. She belongs back where she was promised. Send her to town at dusk. Or pay. Mary Lou read it once and felt the old heat of shame rise, the same heat that had burned in the square. Then, steady as setting a plate, she put the paper down. I belong where I'm treated honest, she said, voice low. Ethan's face was iron in the lamplight. He folded the note careful and fed it to the stove. It curled, blackened, and flared. From the cottonwoods, something moved. No wind, no animal. A lantern winked once and vanished as if an eye had closed. Ethan set the rifle by the door and slid the bolt. Looks like Franklin learned to whisper, he said. Now we'll see if he knows how to listen. Snow tested their bodies, but pride tested their souls. Winter bore down on Silver Creek like a mule that wouldn't quit kicking. The sun rose pale and left no warmth. Fences cracked under the weight of ice, and the wind scoured the valley until men cursed at their own breath. Ethan McGraw pulled his collar high and worked anyway, because work was the only answer a rancher ever had. Mary Lou matched him, though her hands were softer than any tool. She fed the stock, hauled water from the frozen pump, and split kindling with a hatchet too heavy for her frame. At first she fumbled, the blade sticking crosswise, but stubbornness steadied her grip. By week's end, her palms bore blisters proud as medals. When she dropped an armload of wood by the stove, Ethan noticed the torn skin and muttered, "Hard way to prove yourself." She looked him square. "Every way's been the hard way. I'm still here, che." That truth stuck in him deeper than she knew. One morning, a calf came too early, born in the snow behind the barn. Ethan waded through drifts with rope and lantern, jaw clenched against the cold. Mary Lou trailed him, skirt soaked, heart hammering. She held the lantern steady while he pulled, his big hands gentle on the heifer. When the calf slid free and shook its small head, steam rising from its body, Mary Lou let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. For the first time since St. Louis, her laughter rang clean in the night air. Ethan glanced at her then, really looked, not at curves that town men whispered about, but at the fire in her eyes, the courage in her stance. He turned back to cover the calf with burlap, but something had shifted. Days lengthened, but the cold did not ease. Franklin's shadow stretched across every conversation in town. At Rachel's saloon, men muttered that McGraw had taken in a woman not his, that she'd tricked him into giving her shelter. Franklin's money fueled the talk. His pride stoked it hotter. He stood tall in the bank, voice smooth, hinting that Ethan's spread was ripe for the taking if debts tilted wrong. Sheriff Cole rode out to warn Ethan. "He's rattling fences in more ways than one," the lawman said, blowing on his hands. "Keep your eyes sharp. A man cornered by shame can be worse than one cornered by wolves." That evening, Mary Lou found Ethan at the workbench, bridle leather across his lap, knife working slow. She touched the photo frame on the shelf. A young woman with soft features, faded eyes. Ethan's wife. He stiffened. "She looks kind," Mary Lou said gently. "She was," Ethan answered, voice rough. "The kind you don't replace." The room thickened with silence. Mary Lou wanted to say more, but the words knotted in her throat. She turned back to the stove, shoulders tight. Later, as snow hammered the roof, she brushed her hair beside the lamplight. The strands tumbled down, glinting in the glow. Ethan sat across the room, eyes caught before he looked away. The fire hummed low, the air heavy with things unsaid. They were pulled close by that silence, drawn as sure as rivers run downhill. But when Ethan's gaze drifted to the photograph on the shelf, the moment faltered. He rose with a limp, muttering about the woodpile, and left her staring at the flame until tears blurred the edges. That night, sleep was thin. The storm outside clawed the shutters, and coyotes wailed on the ridge. Mary Lou lay awake, her chest aching with want and shame in equal measure. Ethan's chair creaked in rhythm, as if he too wrestled with ghosts. At dawn, she found him on the porch, snow crusting his hat brim, eyes on the horizon. He didn't turn when she stepped beside him. "Winter's long," he said. "Breaks most things that ain't built strong." She tightened the shawl around her and answered, "Then I'll just have to be stronger." Behind them, the fire smoked in the chimney. Ahead, the cottonwood stood black against the sky, and in the hush between wind gusts came the faint creak of saddle leather. Someone was out there, watching. And the bitter days were only beginning. Gunfire split the fog, and for the first time, she held a pistol steady. The fog came rolling off the creek that morning, thick as wool, swallowing fence lines and blurring the cottonwoods into gray shadows. Ethan McGraw stood at the barn door, Winchester balanced easy in his hands, eyes narrowed against the mist. He hadn't slept much. The dogs had paced half the night, growling low, and the horses were restless in their stalls. Trouble had a smell, and it hung heavy in the air. Mary Lou carried a pail of oats, her breath rising in quick clouds. She felt the unease in her bones, the same tightness she'd known back east when her stepfather's temper filled a room before a word was spoken. She set the pail down and whispered, "They're out there, aren't they?" Ethan didn't answer, but his jaw worked. He stepped into the yard, the limp in his bad leg sharper in the cold. From the fog came the creak of saddle leather, then the faint jingle of spurs. Voices followed, low, muffled, 2 or 3 at least. Then a figure broke through the mist. Franklin Dorsey, coat buttoned high, hat pulled low, a revolver slung at his side. 2 riders flanked him, one thin and twitchy, the other broad-shouldered with a scar across his cheek. Sam Tucker, the hired hand, trailed behind, eyes down, shame carved deep in his face. "McGraw," Franklin called, his tone smooth but brittle, "you've got something that belongs to me." His gaze slid past Ethan to Mary Lou, standing stiff by the barn. "She came here on my promise. My word binds her." Mary Lou stepped forward before Ethan could speak, voice clear, shaking only at the edges. "Your word broke the moment you shamed me in that square. I'm no man's property." Franklin's face flushed, his pride cut raw by her defiance. He spat into the snow. "Fine words from a woman living in another man's cabin. You think this cripple can keep you safe?" The word hung like a lash. Ethan's eyes hardened, but his voice stayed level. "You best ride out, Franklin. Nothing here for you." The broad-shouldered rider shifted, hand brushing the butt of his pistol. The fog pressed in, thick and damp. Mary Lou's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to move closer to Ethan, but she forced her boots still. It broke fast. The twitchy rider drew first, pistol flashing. Ethan's rifle cracked, the shot tearing through the man's sleeve, spinning the gun from his hand. Horses screamed, hooves tearing mud. The scarred rider fired back, the bullet hissing past Ethan's hat brim. Mary Lou ducked behind the fence rail, heart slamming. Franklin drew his revolver, but his hand shook. Mary Lou saw it, and before fear could swallow her, she snatched Ethan's old Colt from the fence post where he'd left it, raised it clumsy but steady. "Don't," she said, voice raw but fierce. "Not another step." For a breath, time froze. Fog curled between them, gunmetal gleaming dull in the pale light. Ethan's rifle stayed trained. Mary Lou's hands trembled, but didn't falter. And Franklin saw for the first time that he was outnumbered not by weapons, but by will. "Damn you both," he hissed, backing his horse. He waved at his men. "We're not finished." The scarred rider hauled the wounded man back into the mist. Sam Tucker lingered, his eyes flicking to Mary Lou, apology written there, then spurred after them. Silence settled as the hoofbeats faded. Ethan lowered his rifle slow. Mary Lou's grip slackened, the Colt nearly slipping from her fingers. He stepped close, steadying her hand before she dropped it. "You did fine," he said, voice quiet as the fog. She met his eyes, breath shuddering. "I thought I'd die right there, but you didn't." He holstered the Colt and rested his palm lightly on her shoulder, warm through the shawl. "That matters." The fog began to lift, revealing the ranch scarred by hoof marks, fence splintered, earth torn. Mary Lou looked at the ruin and then back at him. "They'll be back," she whispered. Ethan nodded, gaze on the horizon where the mist was thinning. "Yes, and next time, they won't come just to scare us." Inside the cabin, the stove still burned, stew simmering as if nothing had happened. But outside, the air carried the echo of gunfire and the knowledge that Silver Creek's quiet days were gone. Betrayal came, wearing a familiar face, and left her with blood on her hands. The snow broke at last, leaving the ground crusted with ice that cracked under every step. The sky hung low, heavy with gray, but for a brief day the wind died and the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan used the quiet to mend fence posts, while Mary Lou toted nails and held boards steady. Their rhythm had grown sure, her hands less clumsy, her back stronger. Still, she caught his glance once or twice, quick, measuring, the way a man notes a partner and not a burden. By noon, Rachel O'Hara rode out with word from town. "Franklin's licking his wounds," she said, eyes sharp, "but he ain't done. Men like him don't let shame lie. He's been talking with Tucker." Mary Lou felt her stomach drop. She remembered Sam's eyes when he rode away in the fog, that flicker of guilt. Rachel leaned close. "If Tucker's feeding him your business, you best watch the tree line." That night, the dogs barked long and low. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and scanned the dark ridge where the pines pressed thick. Nothing moved but shadow. Mary Lou pulled his duster around her shoulders, the weight a comfort. Though her heart raced, she thought she saw a lantern flicker once and vanish. Ethan muttered, "They're closer than I like." Come morning, Ethan saddled the mare. "We'll ride the fence together," he said. "Best see what they're planning." Mary Lou cinched her borrowed flannel tighter and mounted up, awkward but steady. The trail wound through drifts until the pines closed over them, muting the world. They found the cut wire near the west ridge, neat and deliberate. Tracks led off into the timber. Ethan studied them, jaw tight. "They're testing the land again, counting what's yours before they take it." From deeper in the trees came the snap of a branch. Horses shifted, then voices, low, hurried. Ethan raised his hand, signaling silence. But Sam Tucker stepped from the shadows, pistol loose in his grip. His face was pale, eyes darting. "Ethan," he said, voice rough, "you should have paid me off. Franklin's offering more than you ever will." Behind him, two of Franklin's hired men appeared, rifles aimed. Mary Lou's heart thudded like a drum. Ethan eased his rifle to bear, but his bad leg betrayed a hitch in his stance. One of the gunmen smirked, lifting his barrel higher. Mary Lou didn't think. She spurred her horse forward, shouting, drawing their eyes. The shot rang wild, splintering bark where her shoulder had been. She threw herself down, rolling in the snow, hand closing around the knife at her belt. When the scarred man lunged to grab her, she drove the blade up with all the fear and fury she had. The world narrowed to heat and breath and the sick shock of steel sliding home. The man staggered, eyes wide, then fell into the snow. Mary Lou dropped the knife, her hands shaking, her chest heaving. Ethan's rifle barked twice, clean and sure. Tucker dove behind a tree, shouting curses, then bolted into the pines, his horse crashing after him. The last rider fled hard on his heels, leaving only churned snow and the echo of gunfire. Silence fell heavy. Mary Lou knelt in the drift, staring at her hands, crimson smeared across her palms. Her voice broke. "I killed him." Ethan limped to her side, pulled the duster around her trembling shoulders. "You defended yourself. That's the only truth you need." His eyes were steady, though the weight in them said he knew what such a moment cost. She looked at him, tears burning hot despite the cold. "I didn't want this." "No one does," he said softly. "But the West don't ask what you want. It asks what you'll carry." They rode home slow, the dead man left for the coyotes and the snow. Mary Lou's gaze fixed on the horizon, but her mind replayed the flash of the blade, the heat of his breath, the terrible finality. By the time they reached the cabin, she felt older, harder, as if a door had shut behind her forever. That night, she sat by the stove staring into the coals. Ethan said little, only poured her coffee and kept the rifle close by. Outside, the pines whispered in the wind, carrying secrets that would not stay buried. The town gathered, hungry for scandal, but she faced them with nothing but truth. The thaw came sudden, with rain that beat the roof like fists. Snow melted into mud, filling the ruts of Main Street and turning the creek into a swollen beast. Silver Creek smelled of wet pine, horse sweat, and tension. Word spread faster than the water. Franklin Dorsey was calling a town meeting, and his tongue was sharper than ever. Rachel O'Hara warned them first. She rode out at dawn, skirts soaked to the knee, and dismounted in Ethan's yard. "He's telling folks you're hiding a woman out here like stolen stock," she said, wiping rain from her eyes. "He means to put you on trial in the square, McGraw. Trial by rumor, if not by rope." Mary Lou gripped the porch rail. Her stomach turned, but her eyes flashed. "Then let me speak. I've run long enough. If the town must hear a story, let it be mine." Ethan studied her, rain dripping from his hat brim. "They'll cut you down with words before you finish the first sentence." "Then I'll outlast them," she said. By midday, the whole town crowded into the square. Wagons rimmed the street, horses tied along the rail. The air buzzed with voices, suspicion sharp as vinegar. Franklin stood on the bank steps, polished boots gleaming despite the mud, his coat collar turned up against the wet. Sam Tucker lurked near the back, hat low, avoiding eyes. Franklin raised his arms. "Folks, I made a mistake, I admit it. This woman tricked me with false letters, false promises. She's dangerous, set on deceiving us all. And McGraw," he paused, letting the name hang. "McGraw shelters her, hoping to snare what ain't his." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ethan felt the weight of 100 eyes, but he stood steady. Mary Lou stepped forward before he could speak. Her shawl clutched tight, chin lifted. "False letters," she said, voice ringing against the rain. "You wrote them, Franklin Dorsey. Promises of a life, of honor. I crossed states on your word, and you cast me aside because I didn't fit your pride. That's the only falsehood here." The crowd shifted, uneasy. A woman whispered. A man cleared his throat. Franklin's face flushed, but he forced a smile. "Listen how clever she is, turning shame to story. That's how snakes live. Sweet words, poisoned bite." Mary Lou's hands trembled, but she steadied them on the rail. "I came west for truth. I found it in hard work, in firewood split, in calves birthed in the snow. Ethan McGraw gave me a roof when you would have left me to freeze. That's the truth you don't want told." The sheriff's boots clomped across the boards. Cole Avery took his place beside them, hand on his badge. "Truth's a stubborn thing," he said, his voice slow, carved from years. "And I've seen with my own eyes who shelters who. McGraw's done no wrong here." The square buzzed louder now, the crowd tipping. Franklin saw it slipping, and his mask cracked. "You'd believe a stray and a cripple over me?" he barked. His hand twitched toward his holster, pride burning hotter than sense. Ethan moved quick, stepping between Franklin and Mary Lou. His bad leg dragged, but his stance was iron. "You'll not raise a hand to her," he said, rifle low but ready. Rain drummed the rooftops, the air thick with breathless silence. Franklin's eyes darted, the crowd watching, waiting. His pride cornered him tighter than any noose. And then, with a snarl, he yanked the revolver free. Gasps broke the air. Women pulled children back. Sheriff Cole reached, but he was too far. Mary Lou's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't move. She couldn't. Ethan's body was the wall between her and death, his broad back the only shield she had in the world. The square held its breath. Steel gleamed dull in the storm light. And Silver Creek braced for gunfire. At high noon, one bullet would decide whose pride lived and whose honor stood. The storm passed in the night, leaving the air washed clean but tense as a drawn bowstring. By morning, the square of Silver Creek filled again. Men leaning on posts, women clutching shawls, children peeking from behind skirts. Word spread fast. Franklin Dorsey had called out Ethan McGraw. A duel, plain as daylight. The sun hung high, sharp and pitiless. Mud had dried to hard crust, and every step on the boardwalk rang hollow. Franklin stood, polished as ever, boots shining, revolver slung low on his hip. Pride burned hotter than sense in his eyes. Sam Tucker hovered at his side, pale and sweating, wishing he was anywhere else. Ethan limped into the square, hat low, coat worn, rifle cradled in his hands. He looked every inch the man he was, weathered, scarred, but unbroken. Mary Lou walked a few paces behind, chin set, her presence a steadying flame. Sheriff Cole stepped between them, holding up a palm. "This town ain't built for blood," Cole said, voice heavy. "But if you two men are set, then by God it'll be clean. No tricks, one chance." Franklin sneered. "I don't need tricks to put down a cripple." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan said nothing. He simply shifted his stance, balancing on the bad leg with quiet resolve. Mary Lou's heart hammered, but she saw it. The calm in his eyes, the stillness of a man who had already decided what mattered. Cole dropped his hand. The street fell silent. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Dust swirled in a thin breeze. A church bell clanged once in the distance. Then Franklin drew. His revolver cleared leather, but his hand trembled, rage guiding faster than skill. Ethan's rifle barked once, the sound splitting the square like thunder. Franklin staggered, his gun firing wild into the dirt, smoke curling from the muzzle. He dropped to his knees, clutching a shoulder torn crimson. The crowd gasped, pulling back. Sam Tucker bolted, knocking over a barrel as he fled down the alley. Franklin looked up, face pale, eyes wide with something close to fear. She ruined me," he rasped. Mary Lou stepped forward, her voice steady as stone. "No, Franklin, your pride did." Cole moved in, kicking Franklin's pistol away, hauling him up rough by the collar. "You'll answer to more than bullets," the sheriff said. "Jail's where your tongue can't buy you out." The square exhaled at once. Men muttered relief, women sighed, children stared wide-eyed at Ethan standing tall despite the limp that ached him near to breaking. Mary Lou moved to his side. For the first time, she laid a hand on his arm openly, in front of them all. He didn't flinch. Their eyes met, quiet thunder passing between them. Silver Creek, fickle as prairie weather, saw something then. Not scandal, not shame, but strength. A woman wronged, a man scarred, standing together against pride and lies. As Franklin was led away, the sun broke through the thinning clouds, painting the square in light. And in that blaze, the whispers that once cut Mary Lou now carried something new, respect. But Ethan, his rifle still in hand, knew this wasn't the end. The West never let a man rest long. And love, like land, had to be defended again and again. Dawn rose over the valley, carrying a vow forged in fire and silence. Morning crept soft across Silver Creek, the kind of dawn that carried no gun smoke, only the smell of wet pine and thawing earth. The storm was gone, the square washed clean, and Franklin Dorsey sat behind iron bars where his words no longer carried weight. For the first time in weeks, the town was quiet. Out at the ranch, Ethan McGraw leaned on the porch rail, his hat pushed back, the limp in his leg heavier from yesterday's strain. He watched the sun push gold over the ridges, painting the valley like a promise. Mary Lou stepped out beside him, shawl drawn around her shoulders, eyes still red from all the nights she'd fought sleep. Neither spoke at first. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just full, like ground rich and ready to plant. Ethan cleared his throat. "Town'll still talk," he said. "Always will." Mary Lou looked at him, steady as the land itself. "Let 'em. I've carried worse than talk." He turned then, reached into his coat, and brought out a small box carved from pine. His big hands looked awkward holding it. He opened it slow, revealing a plain silver band that caught the sunrise like a drop of fire. "This was my mother's," he said, voice low. "If you'll have it. If you'll stay." Tears brimmed in Mary Lou's eyes, but her smile came sure. She slid the ring onto her finger, her hand brushing his. "I already have," she whispered. Later, they worked side by side, mending rails, feeding stock, the rhythm of ranch life returning. Only now, there were 2 mugs on the table, 2 coats on the peg, 2 sets of boots by the door. The cabin no longer echoed, it breathed. Sheriff Cole stopped by in the afternoon, tipping his hat, a rare smile softening the weather in his face. "Seems Silver Creek's got itself a new chapter," he said. "Hold it well." Rachel O'Hara waved from the saddle, her laugh carrying down the lane. Even the neighbors who once whispered passed slower, their nods touched with respect. As spring edged into the valley, Mary Lou felt a new weight in her belly, faint but certain. She shared it one evening, standing with Ethan at the porch rail, while the sky burned red and the first stars pricked through. His arm slid around her waist, rough hand resting gentle. He didn't speak, but the way he drew her closer told her everything. The land was still harsh, the work endless, and trouble would come again someday. But in that moment, with the mountains standing guard and the valley washed in light, Mary Lou knew she had found what she'd crossed half a country for. Not wealth, not a banker's promise, but a home built on honesty and grit. Ethan squeezed her hand, the silver ring catching the last blaze of sun. Together they stood at the rail, two souls battered by the world, yet unbroken, ready to face whatever came with the kind of quiet strength the West demanded. And as night fell, the wind carried not gossip, not judgment, but the sound of coyotes calling far off, wild and free, echoing their vow that here, in this hard valley, love had taken root. The West has always been a hard land, carving scars into those who live beneath its wide sky, but it also offers second chances to the ones stubborn enough to stand their ground. Mary Lou and Ethan found theirs not in riches or grand gestures, but in quiet mornings, honest work, and the courage to keep choosing one another when the world turned cold. Maybe that's the lesson of Silver Creek, that no matter the years or the weight we carry, there's still a place for healing, still a trail that leads to belonging. If this tale stirred something in you, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts. Share what part of their journey spoke to you most, because stories, like the old campfires, burn brighter when folks gather round to talk.